Um, so what do scientists do? Man. Sure, that's the best part of being a scientist, but it is not the only part. Conducting research and doing experiments and collecting things from the field if you're a biologist, that's kind of the most fun part. But I want to teach you a little bit about some of the other parts. First, though, we got to finish up. Yeah, we did 3, right? But 4, which ties directly into what we're about to talk about, has to do with reliable sources. And reliable sources in science, if say a newspaper or a website is reporting on science, their sources can't be anonymous. That's other journalism, not science journalism. Their sources really should only be one thing, and that is peer-reviewed scientific journals. I wasn't lying yesterday. I have in the past done real research. It wasn't on parenting though. It was on bugs. I went to some pretty cool places and studied a bug that survives just about anything. It freezes solid. It can live without oxygen for a week. It can dehydrate to like half its weight and survive. It can live in penguin poop, which is very acidic and anoxic. Yeah.
Someone told me hissing cockroaches.
It did. They died. I will get more probably sometime this year. They're fun. Yeah, I'm kind of a bug guy. That's kind of where I've done my real science. So we did actually generate some scientific research papers that we wrote to kind of present our findings, and we sent them to peer-reviewed scientific journals. One was called Journal of Experimental Biology, and the other one was Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And guess what they did with those papers we sent them?
Nothing.
Not nothing. What do peer-reviewed scientific journals do when scientists send them papers? It's kind of terrifying if you're the scientist.
Yes.
They don't try to replicate your research. Nope. It's right there in the name. They don't. They don't. They're not qualified. They're just publishers. So what they do is they pick 3 scientists that are sort of respected and well-known in your field, and they send them to them. And they say, hey, could you take a look at this and tell us if it looks like a worthwhile study to publish? And any good scientist knows that's part of their job, is to do that for the journals that send them papers. And they go, yeah, okay. And they read through it and say either, yes, this looks like great work. I don't see any major issues. It looks important. You should publish it. Or, there's some problems that they need to fix first, but after that, maybe it's okay. Or, no, this is junk, right? This is not legit. Scary. That's what a peer-reviewed scientific journal is. There's no such thing as anonymous sources. There's no such thing as a well-known expert if they don't name her. If they're talking about science in journalism, they better tell you who it was, who they worked for, and what journal it was published in, including this stuff. What do scientists actually do all day, Mr. Sandro? It's a good question, because it's more than just doing experiments all the time. That's the part scientists tend to enjoy the most, but there are other skills and jobs that you have as a scientist that you have to use as well. So that's what we're going to talk about. And then you get to try your hand at reading your very own scientific journal article. Ben?
What happened when you said that?
They got published. Yeah. I mean, I was working with very smart people who had a lot of experience, so we were fairly sure it would. But yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking waiting for that, that word to come back. All right, so what do actual scientists do? And I can really only talk about the kind of scientists that I work with. And those are basically, I guess you can call them academic scientists who work at a university, use the university's facilities, generally teach some classes in exchange for being allowed to work in the labs at that university and to run the labs at that university. I didn't include teaching in the 4 parts of the job, because that's almost kind of like a separate job, but it is definitely part of most university academic scientists' jobs. You already know half of it. You know 2 of the 4 jobs. Setting up the experiments and writing the papers and presenting their work. The other 2 parts, which most people don't know or think about much. And by the way, you don't have to write most of this stuff. If you want to, if you're really into that, you can, but I'm not going to quiz you over this part. I'll tell you when it's something that I'm going to expect you to know. Reading and learning what has come before you is a huge part. That was a big obstacle for me in joining this group of researchers that I was working with. They basically threw a stack of papers, about 30 high, of the kind of thing you're about to read, and said, you need to catch up a little bit. This is what we've done and the people before us have done as far as research on insects at low temperature. And my life sucked for a little while because I had to read, kind of slog through all these papers like you're gonna. But it's really important so that you know that the work that you're doing hasn't been done before. And so that you know all the things that scientists have learned in your field up until now. So you've got to stay current with work that other scientists are doing. Number 2, this is the part most scientists don't like very much, but science costs money. And your university, while they will pay for, your space and a limited number of supplies, the big money is going to have to come from somewhere else. And so you are going to have to write what is called a grant proposal. Sometimes they just call it grant writing. And grant writing is a skill that every scientist has to have. You basically have to write to different possible funding organizations, sometimes companies, sometimes national organizations, and convince them that your work is worthwhile enough to throw money at you, right? Here's what we're going to do. Here's why it's important. Here's how it will benefit everyone, including you. And here's how much money we're going to need to do it. Here's how long it'll take. Here's what we expect the results to be. Honestly, I think I was only asked to be part of the team of scientists that I was because they liked the way I wrote. And I got to write the part of the grant for this study that involved education. And I knew educational lingo, and so I was able to sort of use the right buzzwords like outreach and inquiry and get that part of the grant written. 3 is actually doing the work, field work, crawling around outside, collecting bugs and taking boats to different islands. That was fun. Bringing the bugs back to the lab, trying to kill them in various ways that they survived. Not quite as much fun as crawling around outside, but kind of cool. And then sharing your work. Writing scientific papers. Presenting at conferences. There's even kind of a step before conferences and papers that is, I think still happens. It did when I was doing it, a poster session where you actually, it's just like what it sounds, you put your work, if you don't have quite enough for a paper, you put what you've done so far on a poster. You get a little easel, it's very cute. And at some conventions, there's poster sessions where scientists kind of stand around by their posters and answer questions from other scientists wandering around wanting to know about their work. Sort of a short way to present your findings. But really, kind of the ultimate, the only legitimate way to put your knowledge into the general scientific body of knowledge, to put your study into it, is a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And so there's thousands of these. They're basically like magazines, maybe 4 times a year they get published. Each one is different. Some of them are incredibly specific. For any branch of medicine you can think of, or surgery or whatever, there's probably a scientific journal that just focuses on that. And then there's some that are more general, and those are usually kind of harder to get published in because they include some of everything. Nature is a famous general scientific journal. Nothing gets published in these without other scientists reading it first. And so we consider this kind of almost like the first line of defense against pseudoscience. Like it's this kind of wide net that should catch bad science. Doesn't always. But it really is a very important part of the scientific process. It's this screening that catches bad science. Really, all you need to know that's quizzible here is the peer-reviewed scientific journal and what they do with papers when they get them. So write down whatever you need to. And then the next slide has the parts of the sections of a scientific paper, and that you will need to write down, and you will need to this if you want, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. There's a general format that pretty much everyone follows. There's small variations sometimes, but what I'm going to show you is basically how it usually goes. It's how the paper you're going to read today is going to be set up. It starts with the abstract. And if you're not actually trying to understand everything about a study, the abstract is sometimes enough. Sometimes you get to just read the abstract, and it's usually only a paragraph or 2. I will tell you that when you write a scientific paper for me, which you will, you absolutely have to write the abstract after you've done everything else. You really don't have a shot at writing a good abstract until you've written everything else, because that's what you're doing, is cooking down everything else into 1 or 2 paragraphs. So you write the abstract last. And it is, do you know what an elevator pitch is? You know the idea of an elevator pitch? Like if you're trying to sell somebody on an idea, the elevator pitch is, what if you only had the elevator ride up to a certain floor to tell them and convince them of what you want to convince them of? It's kind of what this is. It's like it's the 5-minute version of what you did. Then, and you're going to spend some time in this today, the introduction. If scientists are writing well, and they don't always write well, but a good writer in the introduction is basically catching you up on what you need to know to understand their study, which is huge. I'm always frustrated when I try to read a scientific paper and they haven't put enough in that introduction to help me understand what I need to know about their work. That's what it should be. It's also going to tell you about previous work, their previous work, and other people's previous work. It's going to tell you what they were thinking when they started, what their hypothesis was. And so it's a good setup for the rest of the paper. Then, materials and methods, which is where they write down every single gory detail about exactly how they set up their work, what they did, and how they did it. It's usually a pretty long section. And what's nice for you is you get to skip it. Most scientists don't read the materials and methods section. You really only read it if you want to start doing the same kind of work that they're doing. Right? So it's actually kind of gratifying to be able to read the introduction and then just go whoop and skip like 5 pages. Then the results section is the raw data and graphs that have been created to help understand that data. You're generally going to skip this too, at least at first. Because at this point, you probably don't know enough about what they were doing and what they found to really make sense of those graphs yet. What you want to do is skip right from the introduction to what's called the discussion section, which is where they take their results and try to make meaning out of them. Draw conclusions eventually. Tell you what they think it means that their results came out that way. Tell you about the variables that they were unable to manage, things that probably created some experimental error in their research, and why they think their numbers are significant anyway. Otherwise, they wouldn't be publishing this. And finally, where to go from here. What they want to do next, what they hope other scientists pursue next in this sort of line of research. Then, of course, at the end, you get to skip this part too, unless there's some stuff you want to chase down and read because you don't understand what's in this one. References, all the studies that they, one way or another, used. All of them, by the way, are, well, almost all of them are going to be footnoted in the paper itself. So when you're reading a scientific paper and you see a little number, skip to the end, and that number will correspond with the other scientists' work they're referring to. What I'm passing out right now is what I like to call how to read a scientific paper without going insane. You only have to read one. It's going to drop into Google Classroom when I drop it. And you're going to have a Google document that you need to type some answers to the 5 questions at the bottom of this sheet. All right. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing. And some of it's kind of jokey, but I'm mostly not kidding. You're going to probably want to have to read the abstract a bunch of times. And I'm not kidding that you shouldn't even try to read the materials and methods section. I have the sections there. There is kind of a different flavor of scientific paper called the literature review, which is when it's sort of prominent scientists who decide that they know enough about this field that they're going to try and break down what's been done so far for everybody else, right? So it's a review of all the papers that have come before them and kind of how they've built on each other. It's usually a nice way to kind of get a crash course in that field of science. But yeah, you're gonna read the abstract a bunch of times. What you don't understand in the abstract, you're going to comb through the introduction to try and figure out if you can learn it that way. You're going to not be afraid to Google things, okay? Words you don't know, Google it. Swear to God, Google's the best thing, right? I mean, we can know anything we want as long as we're selective and smart about what we put stock in. And then you're going to skip to the discussion section and try and figure out the details of what all this means, what the main ideas are. The 5 questions that you're going to see in that Google document that's your homework is what did the scientists do? How did they do it? Why did they do it? And what use is it? Those kind of go together, right? Like, what's the purpose? Why is this even a thing? Why did someone throw money at them to do this? And what's left to do, in their opinion? Good? Okay, I want you to count off in threes.
3.
1, 2,
Oh, 3.
2.
1.
1, 2, 3.
1.
Good.
1.
Okay. 1 is pigworms. 2 is frozen frogs. 3 is cancer virus. In a minute, when I drop this in classroom, you will see, first of all, you'll see the doc that's the homework, and then you'll see 3 PDFs of scientific papers. You'll know which one's yours. I collected your experimental design stuff, right? Okay, good. Due Monday. This is homework.